3.7 seconds. That was the new cul-de-sac record. A new lap record for Leo the Leadfoot Miller, I shouted into my imaginary microphone, clicking the stopwatch with a flourish. He's smashed his previous time by a full 0.2 of a second. The crowd is on its feet. The sponsors are ecstatic. The crowd was a squirrel who seemed deeply concerned by the whole affair, and the sponsors were the logos I'd let my 10-year-old son, Leo, slap onto his go-kart with permanent marker. NASA, Tesla, and for some reason a crudely drawn logo for a local taco joint. The vehicle itself was our pride and joy. A masterpiece of plywood, lawnmower wheels, and the electric motor from a busted Power Wheels Jeep we'd salvaged from the curb. It had a top speed that could generously be described as a brisk jog, and it made a gentle electric whir that was less offensive than a strong breeze. Leo pulled into our driveway, his pit lane, and killed the power. He pushed his oversized helmet up, his face flushed with the thrill of unbridled 7-mile-per-hour velocity. "Did I beat it, Dad?" "You obliterated it," I said, ruffling his sweaty hair. "The Formula One teams are going to be calling any minute now." It was perfect. One of those crystalline Saturday afternoons in suburban America that feel like they should be in a commercial for laundry detergent or life insurance. The sun was warm, the sky was a deep, cloudless blue, and the scent of freshly cut grass hung in the air. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated father-son bonding. And that, of course, was when I saw her. Karen. She was standing on her porch across the street, a stiff silhouette of righteous indignation against her flawlessly beige siding. Her arms were crossed so tightly it looked like she was trying to administer her own Heimlich maneuver. In her hand, held vertically like a dagger, was her phone. Recording. She has this uncanny ability to move without making a sound, like a Roomba with a vendetta. 1 minute you're enjoying life. The next, you feel the cold prickle of surveillance on the back of your neck, and there she is, judging, documenting. "Having fun, are we?" she called out. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air with the sharp, unpleasant efficiency of a weed whacker severing a garden hose. "We are, Karen, thanks for asking," I called back, injecting a lethal dose of cheerfulness into my tone. Leo's trying to break the land speed record for a vehicle powered by a salvaged battery. It's a real nail-biter. You want an autograph before he goes pro? She didn't smile. I don't think the muscles in her face are configured for it. "Must be nice not to care about the peace and tranquility of the neighborhood." Peace and tranquility. This was her mantra. Our neighborhood could be in the midst of a zombie apocalypse, and Karen would be out there complaining that the groans of the undead were violating the designated quiet hours. "Don't worry," I said, giving the go-kart a pat. "We're about to wrap it up. The pit crew says we're burning too much fuel." Leo giggled. Karen just stared for a moment longer, her phone still aimed at us. Then, with a curt, disapproving nod, she turned and disappeared back into her house. The silence she left behind was somehow heavier than the noise had been. "Is she mad at us?" Leo asked, his voice small. "Buddy," I said, putting an arm around his shoulder. "She wakes up mad. It's got nothing to do with us." I wish I had been right. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It wasn't in a normal envelope. It came in a stiff, cream-colored mailer delivered by a postal worker who required a signature. It felt less like a piece of mail and more like a court summons. The return address simply read, Maple Creek Homeowners Association. My wife, Sarah, eyed it from across the kitchen island. "That looks ominous." "It's probably just a notice about the annual potluck," I said, trying to sound nonchalant as I slit it open with a butter knife. "Hope they're not asking me to bring my 7-layer dip again. The pressure is immense." But it wasn't about dip. The letterhead was heavy, embossed with the HOA logo, an oak leaf strangling a smiling cartoon house. The text was dense, packed with the kind of corporate jargon designed to make you feel stupid and powerless. And then I saw our name, and Leo's go-kart. Formal complaint has been filed regarding the operation of a non-sanctioned, unlicensed nuisance vehicle in clear violation of Maple Creek Covenant, Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4, auditory disturbance and unseemly mechanical displays. I read it twice. Unseemly mechanical displays? What is it? Sarah asked, seeing the color drain from my face. I held up the letter. We've been served. Karen reported the go-kart. You're kidding me. Oh, I wish I was. Apparently we're guilty of unseemly mechanical displays. She makes it sound like we were staging a demolition derby in the driveway. I started pacing, the letter crinkling in my fist. Auditory disturbance? A hummingbird farts louder than that thing. What's next? Is she going to report his bicycle for having a visually aggressive bell? Leo walked in then, holding a glass of milk. He saw our faces, saw the official-looking paper in my hand, and his smile faltered. Am I in trouble? My heart sank. That was the real crime. Not the stupid letter or the petty complaint, but the fact that this woman's bottomless well of misery had finally splashed onto my son. I knelt down and forced a smile. No, buddy, you are not in trouble. A neighbor is just confused. She thinks your awesome race car is a menace to society. Oh, he said, looking at the floor. Should I not ride it anymore? And there it was, the surrender. The quiet acceptance that the fun was over because a miserable person had decided it should be. Sarah shot me a look, the one that said, "Just drop it, Mike. It's not worth it." But as I looked at my son's crestfallen face, something inside me hardened. No, it was worth it. This wasn't about a go-kart anymore. This was about a fundamental principle. You don't let the Karens of the world win. You don't let them extinguish joy just because they've forgotten what it feels like. I looked at Sarah, my eyes blazing with a newfound, incredibly stupid sense of purpose. Don't you worry, Leo, I said, my voice low and determined. We're going to handle this. Before declaring all-out suburban war, I figured I owed it to Sarah to at least try the diplomatic approach. My strategy was simple. Kill them with kindness, show up with a winning smile, appeal to our shared humanity, and find a reasonable compromise. It was an unmitigated disaster. I walked across the street the next evening, timing my approach for when I saw her tending to her garden. Her front yard was a marvel of oppressive symmetry. Her petunias were arranged in perfect, militant rows along the property line, a floral iron curtain separating her world from the rest of ours. Karen, I began, stopping just short of her lawn as if it were a minefield. Got a minute? She stood up slowly, wiping her dirt-free gloved hands on her pristine apron. Michael, I was wondering when you'd be stopping by. Yeah, well, we got the letter from the HOA, I said, forcing a chuckle. Seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding about Leo's go-kart. There's no misunderstanding, she said, her voice flat. It's a noisy, dangerous machine, and it doesn't belong in a residential neighborhood. Dangerous? Karen, it has a lower top speed than your electric toothbrush. And noisy? A Prius is louder. I was hoping we could work something out. Maybe he only rides it for 15 minutes in the afternoon. Between 4 o'clock and 4:15? She actually tilted her head, as if processing a complex mathematical equation. The bylaws are quite clear about nuisance vehicles. There is no designated time for their operation. The designated time is never... This woman spoke exclusively in HOAs. It was like talking to a poorly programmed chatbot. It's a kid's toy, I said, my smile starting to feel like a poorly fitted mask. He's 10? He's just trying to have a little fun. Fun is not an exemption from the rules, she stated, gesturing vaguely around her. These covenants exist to protect our property values, to maintain a certain standard. When people start making their own rules, things fall apart. First it's a go-kart. Next it's a car on blocks in the front yard. It's a slippery slope. A slippery slope. From a battery-powered toy to a full-blown junkyard. The leap in logic was breathtaking. My forced politeness was evaporating under the heat of her absolute, unyielding absurdity. I glanced down at her prize-winning petunias, their smug little faces mocking me. Right, I said, my jaw tight. Well, thanks for the chat, Karen. It's been incredibly illuminating. I walked back to my house, defeated. The diplomatic mission had failed. It was time to consult the Geneva Convention of Petty Disputes. That night, the garage felt like a morgue. Leo and I sat on upside-down buckets, staring at the go-kart. It looked so sad, parked in the corner under a dusty tarp. It was a monument to fun that had been outlawed. We could just give it a new paint job, Leo suggested glumly. Maybe she won't recognize it? I appreciate the cunning, buddy, but I think she'd see through our ruse, I sighed, running a hand over the plywood spoiler. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hum of the garage refrigerator. We started spitballing ideas, each more ridiculous than the last. What if we put wings on it? Leo asked. Then it wouldn't be on the street, it would be in the air. An excellent point. The HOA has no jurisdiction over airspace, but the FAA might have a few notes, I said. What if we launched it with a giant catapult? We could aim it right for the park, a perfect silent arc over her house. Yeah. Leo's eyes lit up for the first time all evening. I was only half joking, but the idea of the go-kart sailing silently over her property was undeniably appealing. It was the silent part that stuck with me. The complaint was about a nuisance vehicle and auditory disturbance. The problem was the motor. The solution, therefore, was to eliminate the motor. But without a motor, how do you make it go? My gaze drifted from the go-kart to the open garage door, across our driveway and up. Up the brick facade of our two-story colonial. Up to the gentle, uniform slope of our roof. Leo had just been talking about a YouTube video he saw of a soapbox derby. Kids in engineless, homemade cars rolling downhill, powered by nothing but optimism and the Earth's gravitational pull. No engine, no noise. Just the gentle, satisfying rumble of wheels on a surface. My eyes went wide. An idea, fully formed and terrifyingly beautiful, bloomed in my mind. It was a work of art. It was malicious compliance raised to an architectural scale. A soapbox derby car is not a nuisance vehicle. It's a wholesome slice of Americana, right up there with apple pie and baseball. And if the starting line for this particular derby just so happened to be on our roof, and if the track, a temporary, non-permanent ramp, just so happened to arc gracefully down our lawn, and if its trajectory just so happened to carry it over a certain neighbor's award-winning petunia bed before landing gently on the public street, well, that wasn't a bylaw violation. That was just physics. You can't report Newton's laws to the HOA. A slow, manic grin spread across my face. Leo saw the look in my eyes and sat up straight. Dad? What is it? I turned to him, my voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. Buddy, I have a terrible, wonderful idea. I laid out the vision, the ramp, the glory, the silent, triumphant flight over the petunias. I explained the loophole. It's not a motor vehicle if there's no motor. It's not a permanent structure if we can take it down. It was airtight. It was genius. It was the single most childish, idiotic, and brilliant plan I had ever conceived. Leo's jaw dropped. His eyes shone with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He looked at me like I had just suggested building a functional rocket ship to the moon out of cardboard boxes. "Can we really do that?" he breathed. "We can't not do that," I said, my voice filled with a conviction that bordered on madness. "This is for justice, son. This is for freedom. This is for every kid who's ever been told to stop having fun." The conspiracy was born. The war had just gone cold, and we were about to start building our nuclear option out of 2x4s. The following weekend, the garage was transformed from a place of mourning into the official headquarters for what we christened Operation Rooftop Rampage. The air crackled with the energy of a secret agent briefing, if the secret agents were a 10-year-old and his slightly unhinged father. Our blueprints were a chaotic masterpiece of suburban rebellion, sketched onto the back of a pizza box with a Sharpie. The initial design was a simple, straight ramp. But as the creative juices started flowing, it evolved. "We need a name for the ramp," Leo declared, chewing on the end of a marker. "How about the Karen Pult?" I suggested. "No, something cooler. The Petunia Punisher 3000? "I like it. Let's add that here," I said, scribbling it at the top of the box. The feature creep was immediate and glorious. Initial design: a straight shot from the edge of the roof to the grass. Revision 1: a slight curve at the end for dramatic flair. Revision 2: Leo's idea, side rails. "For safety," he said seriously. I agreed, adding a note: "Line with pool noodles for extra safety and bounciness." Revision 3: my idea: a small hinged flap at the very top to be released by a rope, like a castle drawbridge. I labeled it the Gate of Glory. Revision 4: Leo again. "Can we put a flag at the top?" My response: "Leo, we must put a flag at the top. A pirate flag." By Sunday afternoon, our pizza box blueprint looked less like a construction plan and more like the fever dream of a mad engineer. We had notes for speed-activated smoke machines, for drama, a small bell at the bottom that the car would hit upon a successful landing, and a query about the feasibility of deployable confetti cannons. The planning phase was a roaring success. The domestic approval phase, however, was a significant hurdle. I found Sarah in the living room, reading a book. I cleared my throat, holding the pizza box behind my back. "Honey, can I borrow you for a quick project proposal briefing?" She lowered her book, her eyes full of suspicion. "Why do you look like a coyote who just bought an Acme rocket?" "It's a presentation," I said, revealing the blueprint. "For a synergistic, multi-platform solution to Leo's recreational vehicle dilemma." I laid the pizza box on the coffee table. She stared at it, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm to sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "Mike, is that our house?" "It is." "And is that a slide coming off the roof?" "It's a gravity-powered launch ramp," I corrected gently. "There's a crucial difference in engineering terminology. See this? This is the Gate of Glory." I walked her through the entire plan, my voice filled with the passion of a Silicon Valley CEO launching a new product. I even had a PowerPoint presentation ready on my laptop, which I had cheekily titled Project Defiance, a synergistic approach to applied physics and neighborly disputes. The slides included the problem: an image of Karen's scowling face next to the HOA letter. The flawed solution: a picture of the go-kart with a giant red X over the motor. The innovative paradigm shift: a heroic-looking diagram of our ramp. Risk-reward analysis: a chart showing risk, minor property damage, public shaming, versus reward, Leo's happiness, Karen's eternal frustration, epic glory. Legal framework, my ace in the hole. Sarah watched the entire presentation without saying a word, her face a perfect mask of wifely patience. When I finished, she took a long, slow sip of her tea. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You want to build a wooden structure based on a drawing on a pizza box from our second-story roof in order to launch our only child into the street, all to annoy the woman across the street." "When you say it like that, it sounds crazy," I admitted. "But it's not to annoy her. That's just a wonderful, wonderful side effect. This is a teaching moment. It's about standing up to bullies. It's about creative problem-solving. It's a hands-on lesson in physics, engineering, and most importantly, civil disobedience. It's a lesson in how to get sued into oblivion, Mike." "Ah," I said, clicking to the final PowerPoint slide. "That's where you're wrong. I present to you the loophole." I knew that to get this past Sarah, I needed more than just enthusiasm. I needed a legal defense. So, I had spent the better part of Saturday night doing something I never thought I'd do. I read our entire 300-page HOA covenant, front to back. It was a document so soul-crushingly boring it could be used as a general anesthetic. I waded through endless clauses about acceptable fence heights, the mandated number of shrubberies, and the specific shades of beige one could paint their mailbox. And then, buried deep in a section about yard accessories, I found it. Article 11, Section F, Prohibited Structures. It listed everything you could imagine. Sheds larger than 100 square feet, permanent basketball hoops, flagpoles over 20 feet high. But right at the end was the golden sentence. These restrictions do not apply to temporary recreational apparatuses, which are not permanently affixed to the property and are removed within a reasonable time frame following use. It was beautiful. It was poetry. The original authors were probably thinking of a bouncy castle or a slip and slide. They never, in their wildest dreams, imagined someone would interpret it to mean a 2-story soapbox derby ramp. I pointed to the screen. "Behold, a temporary recreational apparatus. We'll assemble it for the launch and we'll disassemble it afterward. It's not permanent, it's not a structure, it's an apparatus. The covenant is on our side." Sarah stared at the screen, then back at me. She put her head in her hands and sighed, a long, weary sound that contained years of putting up with my nonsense. "You are going to be the death of me," she said, her voice muffled by her palms. "Is that a yes?" She looked up, and I saw a tiny flicker of a smile at the corner of her mouth. It was the smile of a woman who knew she was married to an idiot, but he was her idiot. "I am not helping you," she said. "I will not fund this. I will deny any and all knowledge of it if questioned, and if Leo gets so much as a scratch, I will dismantle that ramp myself and build a cage for you with the wreckage." "So, a conditional yes," I beamed. "I'll take it. You won't regret this." "I already do," she muttered, picking up her book again. The domestic hurdle had been cleared. The legal framework was established. Operation Rooftop Rampage was a go. Now I just had to find someone crazy enough to help me build it. One does not simply build a 2-story ramp of righteous indignation with a handful of power tools and a dream. I am, at best, an enthusiastic amateur when it comes to construction. My attempts at DIY usually end with something being slightly crooked and me having one fewer fingernail. For a project of this magnitude, one that involved structural integrity and the physical well-being of my son, I needed professionals. Or, at the very least, people who owned a nail gun and weren't afraid of heights. My search for contractors began on a Monday morning. It did not go well. The first guy I called, from a company called Precision Decks and Patios, listened to my pitch in complete silence. I tried to sound as normal as possible, as if I were asking for a quote on a new fence. "So it starts up on the roof line, just above the second-story gutter," I explained. and then it extends down over the lawn with a slight upward curve at the end to ensure a smooth street-level landing for a soapbox derby car. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. "Sir," he finally said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we build decks, not amusement park rides for spite." Click. The second call was even shorter. I got as far as gravity-powered recreational apparatus before the woman on the other end said, "Is this a prank call?" and hung up. The third guy just laughed for 30 seconds straight and then wished me luck. I was starting to lose hope. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I was an idiot who was about to get himself sued, arrested, or both. I sat at my desk, staring at my list of rejected contractors. There was one name left at the bottom, one I'd been avoiding. Their ad in the local paper was rustic. It featured a picture of two burly, bearded men in flannel shirts standing in front of a slightly lopsided but enormous shed. The name of the company was Good Ol' Boys Construction, and their slogan was, "If it's made of wood, we're good." It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had left. I dialed the number. A voice boomed through the receiver, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Good Ol' Boys, Dale speakin'." Hi Dale," I stammered. "My name is Mike. I have a somewhat unconventional construction project I was hoping to get a quote on." "Unconventional is our middle name," he bellowed cheerfully. "What you got? A treehouse with a fire pole? A 3-level chicken coop? We just finished a screened-in porch for a fella's prize-winning pig. Lay it on me." His enthusiasm was infectious. I took a deep breath and launched into my pitch for the third time, but this time I didn't hold back. I told him the whole story: the go-kart, Karen, the HOA, the unseemly mechanical displays, the petunias. I laid out the vision of Operation Rooftop Rampage in all its glory. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. He's going to laugh me off the phone. Instead, I heard him cover the receiver and yell, "Cletus! Cletus, you gotta hear this! This fella wants to build a go-kart ramp off his roof to stick it to his HOA." I heard another booming voice laugh in the background. Dale came back on the line, his voice vibrating with excitement. "Heck yeah, we'll do it! Brother, that is the most American thing I have ever heard! When can we come see the place?" 2 hours later, a Ford F-350 that looked like it had personally won a war against a small mountain rumbled to a stop in front of my house. The doors opened, and out stepped Dale and Cletus. They were identical, magnificent twins. Both stood about 6'4", with arms as thick as tree trunks, and beards that looked like they might be nesting sites for endangered birds. They wore matching flannel shirts and boots caked in the mud of 1,000 righteous jobs. "Mike!" Dale roared, crushing my hand in a grip that could squeeze juice from a bowling ball. "This here's my brother Cletus. We are honored to be here." "A rooftop ramp?" Cletus said, his voice a low rumble. He looked up at my roof, a look of profound, professional admiration on his face. "It's beautiful." I had found my people. We did a walkthrough of the build site. They didn't see problems. They saw creative opportunities. They slapped the exterior walls, nodding sagely. They discussed load-bearing joints and torsional stability with the giddy energy of kids in a candy store. "All right. So the primary launch platform will need to be anchored to the roof trusses," Cletus mused, stroking his beard. "We can do that without any permanent alteration to the structure. Use tension clamps. It'll be solid as a rock, but come apart clean. The ramp itself, we'll build it in 3 modular sections for easy assembly and disassembly," Dale added, pacing out the distance on my lawn. "We'll use pressure-treated pine for the frame and a smooth composite decking for the surface. That thing'll be slicker than a greased eel in an ice storm." They were taking it seriously. More seriously, in fact, than I was. They started sketching on a notepad, their design far more professional than my pizza box blueprint. They included cross-bracing support legs with adjustable feet to account for the slope of the lawn, and high side walls. "Now," Dale said, turning to me with a grave expression, "let's talk about the aesthetic. You want this thing to send a message? You want racing stripes on the ramp? We can do that, red and white." "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I want racing stripes." "And the Gate of Glory," Cletus said, pointing to my blueprint, which I had shown them with a measure of embarrassment. "We can rig that with a pulley system. You pull a rope from the ground, the gate drops, and the kid is off. It'll be real dramatic." I could have hugged them. They weren't just contractors, they were artisans. They were co-conspirators. They saw my ridiculous, petty dream and didn't just agree to build it. They wanted to make it better. "So, what's something like this gonna cost?" I asked, bracing for a number that would make my wallet burst into flames. Dale and Cletus looked at each other, then back at me. "Normally, a custom job like this, with the on-site engineering challenges, it'd be pretty steep," Dale said. Cletus nodded. "But this ain't a normal job. This is a job for the history books. This is for the little guy. Tell you what, you cover the cost of materials and we'll just charge you our good neighbor labor rate," he winked, "which is basically just enough to cover gas and beer." I was stunned. "Are you serious?" "As a tax audit," Dale boomed. "We've all had a Karen in our lives, Mike. Consider this a public service." The A-team was assembled. Operation Rooftop Rampage was fully funded and greenlit for construction. As they drove away in their monster truck, leaving a cloud of triumphant diesel smoke in their wake, I looked over at Karen's house. She was peeking through her blinds. I gave her a little wave. Let the games begin. The lumber arrived on Wednesday. It wasn't a subtle delivery. A massive flatbed truck groaned its way into our quiet little cul-de-sac and deposited a pile of wood in my driveway that looked large enough to build a Viking longship. The sound of pressure-treated pine hitting asphalt echoed like the first cannon shot in a war. Across the street, Karen's front door opened instantly. She emerged onto her porch, clipboard in hand, and began taking notes. Her transition from nosy neighbor to full-time battlefield documentarian was complete. Dale and Cletus arrived moments later, their truck filled with saws, drills, and an almost terrifying amount of cheerful energy. "Morning, Mike," Dale roared, clapping me on the back. "It's a beautiful day for construction and for liberty." The work began immediately. The rhythmic thump-thump of hammers and the high-pitched whine of circular saws became the new soundtrack of Maple Creek. We worked in the garage with the door down as much as possible, assembling the 3 modular ramp sections. It was like building a giant, high-stakes IKEA project. Leo was my official assistant, passing me screws, holding boards steady, and generally basking in the glorious, sawdust-filled atmosphere. Of course, we couldn't hide in the garage forever. The day we had to start building the rooftop platform was the day the Cold War turned hot. Karen was waiting for us. She stood on her lawn, arms crossed, her phone out. "What is all this?" she demanded as Dale and Cletus began hauling supports up a ladder. "Just some routine roof repairs, Karen," I shouted down, trying to sound as boring as possible. "You know how it is. Gotta check the shingles, make sure the structural integrity is up to snuff. Very important stuff. Wouldn't want a roof collapsing in this neighborhood. Think of the property values." "That doesn't look like a roof repair," she sniffed, zooming in with her phone. "That looks like you're building a deck on your roof, which is a direct violation of Article 4, Section B." "It's not a deck, it's a temporary shingle-holding platform," Cletus chimed in from the roof, not missing a beat. "OSHA requirement, safety first." She clearly didn't buy it. but our unified front of blatant lies left her sputtering. She retreated to her porch, but her surveillance only intensified. I'm pretty sure she set up a time-lapse camera in her upstairs window. We were her personal Discovery Channel special. Suburban Anarchy. The Cul-de-sac Crisis. The project became the talk of the neighborhood. People would walk their dogs a little slower past our house, trying to get a look. I got a few thumbs up from other dads who were clearly living vicariously through my petty rebellion. Mr. Henderson from 2 doors down, a retired engineer, came over to inspect the work and ended up enthusiastically suggesting we use galvanized lag bolts instead of standard screws for the main supports. He became an unofficial consultant, but with support came opposition. Karen, predictably, escalated. Having failed to intimidate us directly, she turned to the ultimate weapon in the HOA arsenal. She called the cops. I was on the lawn, handing a piece of plywood up to Dale, when the cruiser rolled silently into the cul-de-sac. It parked right between our houses, the blue and red lights off, which somehow made it more intimidating. A lone officer got out. He looked young, tired, and profoundly unenthusiastic about being there. His name tag read Miller. Karen practically sprinted across her lawn to meet him, her clipboard of evidence in hand. "Officer, thank you for coming. It's right here. They're building an illegal launch pad on their roof." Officer Miller listened patiently, his expression unchanging. He took her clipboard, glanced at her blurry phone pictures, and then turned his weary gaze on me and the half-finished monstrosity on my roof. He walked over, his footsteps heavy on the asphalt. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a deadpan monotone. "So, a launch pad." "Good afternoon, officer," I said, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. My heart was hammering. This was it, game over. "It's not a launch pad. That would be ridiculous." "That's what I thought," he said. "So what would you call it?" "It's a temporary gravity-powered recreational apparatus," I said, reciting the holy text from the HOA covenant, "for a wholesome father-son soapbox derby project." Dale and Cletus had clambered down the ladder and were now standing behind me, their massive frames creating a wall of flannel-clad solidarity. Officer Miller looked from me to the ramp, then back to me. A muscle in his cheek twitched. I couldn't tell if he was about to laugh or write me the biggest ticket in the history of suburban policing. "A soapbox derby, from the roof." "That's correct," I said. "We checked the HOA bylaws. There are no specific prohibitions against it, as long as it's not a permanent structure." I held my breath. He was silent for a long moment. I could feel Karen's eyes boring into us from across the street. She was practically vibrating with anticipation, certain that she was about to witness the law come crashing down upon my unseemly mechanical display. Finally, Officer Miller spoke. "You checked the bylaws?" "Thoroughly," I confirmed. He let out a long, slow sigh, the kind of sigh that says, "I don't get paid enough for this." He looked over at Karen, who was now tapping her foot impatiently. "Ma'am," he called across the lawn, "as far as I can tell, they're on their own property. They're not breaking any city ordinances. If they're violating a homeowners association bylaw, that's a civil matter. You'll have to take it up with your association." Karen's face fell. "But it's a launch pad," she sputtered. "It's a collection of wood, ma'am," Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "For now. If they actually launch someone off of it and they get hurt or damage property, then you can call me." He handed her back the clipboard. "Have a nice day." He gave me a final, unreadable look, a slight shake of his head, and got back in his car. As he drove away, I could have sworn I saw him crack a tiny smile in his rearview mirror. It was a massive victory. Karen stood on her lawn, utterly defeated, the wind knocked out of her sails. I gave her a polite little nod, which seemed to enrage her even more. She stormed back into her house. But the battle wasn't over. It had just moved to a new front. The next morning, I received a flood of emails. Apparently, a sympathetic member of the HOA board, Mrs. Gable from down the street, had been secretly forwarding me Karen's official complaints. Subject: urgent. Egregious bylaw violation at 112 Maple Drive. To the esteemed members of the board, it is with a heavy heart that I must once again report on the escalating crisis at the Miller residence. The unauthorized construction continues unabated. The police have been summoned and have unfortunately deferred to the civil authority of this board. There were attachments, dozens of them, pictures from every conceivable angle, a detailed timeline of construction, and a 6-page document she had written titled, "The Potential Impact of Rooftop Launch Ramps on Community Property Values." She was trying to bury us in paperwork, to force the HOA's hand through sheer, overwhelming bureaucracy. But I had my loophole. And now, I had something even more powerful. Momentum. The visit from the cop had turned our project from a neighborhood curiosity into a local legend. The Battle of Wills was reaching its endgame. The ramp was almost finished. All we had to do was see it through. By Friday evening, it was done. And it was magnificent. It stood there, a proud, absurd monument to a grudge. The Petunia Punisher 3000 was more glorious than I had ever imagined. Dale and Cletus had outdone themselves. The pressure-treated pine gleamed in the setting sun. The red and white racing stripes were perfectly crisp, giving it a professional, almost legitimate look. The high sidewalls, lined with bright blue pool noodles, gave it a festive, almost playful air that belied its vengeful purpose. At the very top, attached to the Gate of Glory, a small pirate flag with a skull and crossbones fluttered defiantly in the breeze. It was the most beautiful, ridiculous thing I had ever seen. That night, the garage was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. It was the calm before the storm. Leo and I were putting the final touches on the soapbox car. We'd removed the motor and battery, stripped it down to its bare essentials. We'd added new, smoother wheels that we'd ordered online. Leo was carefully applying the racing number, a big, bold 01, to the hood. "Are you nervous?" I asked him, tightening a bolt on the steering wheel. "A little," he admitted, not looking up from his work. "What if it doesn't work? What if I crash?" I stopped what I was doing and looked at him. In the dim light of the garage, he looked so small. For a second, a wave of parental guilt washed over me. What the hell was I doing? I had built a 2-story ramp to launch my son off the roof of our house. When you say it out loud, it really does sound like a preliminary hearing for Child Protective Services. Sarah's warnings echoed in my head. But then I looked at the ramp, visible through the open garage door, and at the determined look on Leo's face as he perfectly aligned his sticker. This wasn't just about spite anymore. It was about showing him that you could face something intimidating, whether it was a bully neighbor or a giant wooden ramp, and not back down. It was about building something, together, and seeing it through to the end. "It's going to work," I said, my voice full of a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Dale and Cletus are geniuses, and you are the best driver in this cul-de-sac. We've got this." I put my hand on his shoulder. "But if at any point you don't want to do it, you just say the word. No questions asked. We can just take the ramp down and say we won." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and serious. "No way," he said. "I'm doing it." The morning of the launch, or as Leo had dubbed it, Derby Day, the air was electric. Word had spread through the neighborhood grapevine. As I drank my coffee and stared out the kitchen window, I saw people starting to gather. Mr. Henderson was setting up a lawn chair. The family from the corner house came out with their kids. It was turning into an impromptu block party. Sarah was a nervous wreck. She paced the kitchen, alternating between peeking through the blinds and closing her eyes as if in prayer. "I can't watch," she said for the 10th time. "But I also can't not watch." And across the street, the enemy was at her command post. Karen was on her porch, sitting in a wicker chair. She wasn't holding a clipboard today. She had her phone mounted on a small tripod. She was dressed in a crisp white visor and a pastel polo shirt. She looked like a tennis umpire ready to call a fault. She was ready, I knew, to capture the exact moment of our epic, disastrous failure for posterity, and for the inevitable lawsuit. It was time. "All systems are go," I said into my imaginary walkie-talkie. "The Eagle is ready for flight." Leo, decked out in his helmet and a pair of swimming goggles, gave me a thumbs up. He was practically vibrating with a mixture of fear and pure, uncut excitement. Together, with Dale and Cletus providing the muscle, we carried the soapbox car, the Comet, as Leo had christened it, out of the garage and up the ladder to the roof. The view from the top was something else. Our little cul-de-sac looked like a stadium. There were maybe 30 people out on their lawns now, all looking up at us. I could see faces pressed against windows in the houses down the street. We were the main event. Dale and Cletus positioned the Comet at the top of the ramp, its front wheels resting against the closed gate of glory. They gave the whole structure a final, reassuring shake. It was as solid as the house it was attached to. "She's ready, Captain," Dale said, giving me a salute. "Good luck, little dude," Cletus said to Leo, ruffling his helmet. "Aim for the roses." He meant the petunias, and I loved him for it. The two of them descended, leaving just Leo and me on the roof. The pirate flag snapped in the wind next to us. It was strangely quiet up there. The murmur of the crowd, a distant buzz. It was time for the speech. I stood up, holding onto the chimney for balance, and cleared my throat. I projected my voice as best I could, a ridiculously formal tone for a man in a t-shirt standing on his own roof. "Friends, neighbors, residents of Maple Creek," I began. "Today we gather not to defy bylaws, but to celebrate them, to celebrate the spirit of innovation that our HOA covenants so clearly encourage." A few people chuckled. Karen's face remained a mask of stone. "Today we celebrate ingenuity," I continued, getting into the rhythm. "We celebrate the wholesome American tradition of the soapbox derby, but most of all, we celebrate the beautiful, elegant, and non-negotiable laws of physics." I looked at Leo. He was gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. I leaned down close to him. "You ready, champ?" I whispered. He nodded, a quick, jerky motion. "Ready, Dad?" "I'll see you at the bottom," I said, and squeezed his shoulder. I climbed down the ladder to the launch rope, which dangled near a second-story window. This was the moment of truth. The crowd was silent. Sarah was a silhouette in the living room window. Karen had her finger hovering over the record button on her phone. I took a deep breath, looked up at my son, and gave him a final, confident nod. Then, I pulled the rope. Screak. The gate of glory dropped with a satisfying thwack. For a split second, nothing happened. The comet just sat there, hesitating on the precipice between potential and kinetic energy. And then gravity took over. The car rolled forward, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The sound of the plastic wheels on the composite decking was a low rumble that grew into a roar. Whirr. It was the sound of pure, unpowered momentum. It was the sound of victory. I watched, my heart in my throat, as the car shot down the ramp. It was a blur of red and white and a small boy in a helmet. He hit the gentle upward curve at the bottom, the ramp flexing perfectly under the force. And then he was airborne. Time seemed to slow down. The comet lifted off the ramp in a perfect, beautiful arc. It wasn't a huge jump, maybe 3 or 4 feet off the ground at its peak, but it felt like Evel Knievel clearing the fountains at Caesar's palace. It sailed through the air, a silent, graceful vessel of suburban defiance. And right below it, a bed of perfectly arranged, award-winning pink and purple petunias. It cleared them. Oh, it cleared them by a country mile. The shadow of the car passed over the flowers like a fleeting cloud, not a single petal disturbed. The landing was a thing of beauty. The car's wheels hit the downslope of the street with a solid, satisfying thump. The suspension, my idea, bungee cords, absorbing the impact perfectly. It straightened out and rolled, straight as an arrow for another 50 feet before coming to a gentle, controlled stop right in front of the cul-de-sac's stop sign. For a moment, there was absolute, stunned silence. The entire neighborhood held its collective breath. Then, Leo's small figure pushed his goggles up and threw both fists into the air in a gesture of pure, triumphant joy. The cul-de-sac erupted. It wasn't just polite applause, it was a roar. People were cheering, whistling, clapping. Mr. Henderson was on his feet, pumping his fist. The family from the corner house was jumping up and down. I saw Sarah through the window, both hands over her mouth, tears of what I hoped was relief in her eyes. I looked across the street. Karen was still standing there, phone in hand, but she wasn't recording anymore. Her mouth was slightly agape. Her perfectly constructed world of rules and regulations had just been defied by a 10-year-old in a homemade car, and there was absolutely nothing she could do about it. Her face was a priceless, perfect portrait of system failure. We had won. I was halfway down the ladder, my legs shaky with adrenaline, when the familiar sight of a police cruiser rolled back into the cul-de-sac. This time I wasn't worried. This felt more like a curtain call. Officer Miller stepped out of his car, the same weary expression on his face. Karen, having rebooted from her shock, was already marching toward him, her phone held out like an offering. "Did you see that? Did you see it? He launched him right over my property. It's reckless endangerment." Miller ignored her. He walked past her, his eyes on the scene. Leo was being mobbed like a rock star, high-fiving the neighborhood kids. Dale and Cletus were doing a bizarre, lumbering victory dance near the end of the ramp. Miller walked over to me, stopping to inspect the soapbox car, which sat proudly by the stop sign. He nudged one of the wheels with his boot. He looked at me, then over at Karen's immaculate flower bed, then back at me. He lowered his voice. "Did it clear the petunias?" he asked, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "With room to spare, officer," I said, grinning from ear to ear. He nodded slowly, a single, decisive nod. "Right then." He turned and walked over to Karen, who was still trying to show him her phone footage. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet street. "As I told you before, no laws were broken here. No one was hurt. No property was damaged." He paused for effect. "Frankly, I'm more concerned about you calling 911 for a non-emergency. It ties up resources. Please don't do it again." It was the final, fatal blow. She was dismissed, publicly, by the very authority she had tried to weaponize. Without another word, she turned, her shoulders slumped in defeat, and retreated into her house for the last time that day. The beige door closed with a quiet, final click. The rest of the afternoon was a celebration. Neighbors I'd only ever waved to came over to shake my hand. Dale and Cletus were treated like visiting heroes. Sarah finally came outside, shaking her head. But she was smiling, a genuine, "I can't believe you pulled it off" smile. She walked right up to me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and gave me a huge hug. "You are an absolute child," she whispered in my ear, "and I am so proud of you." That evening, the smell of celebratory burgers filled the air. We had a BBQ on our back deck. The ramp, our temporary monument to suburban warfare, still stood proudly in the yard, silhouetted against the sunset. Dale, Cletus, and their families were there, along with Mr. Henderson and a few other neighbors. It felt like a real community. Later, after everyone had gone home, Leo and I stood on the deck, looking at our creation. The pirate flag still fluttered at the top. "That was the best day ever, Dad," he said, his voice soft with happy exhaustion. "Yeah," I said, putting my arm around him. "Yeah, it was—" "Is Karen still going to be mad?" he asked. "Probably, buddy," I admitted. "Some people are just built that way. But you know what? It doesn't matter. You know why?" He looked up at me. "Because sometimes in life," I said, looking him right in the eye, "people will tell you that you can't have a go-kart. And that's when you have to build a ramp off the roof." He smiled, a wide, sleepy, satisfied smile. He understood. I looked over at Karen's house, which was dark and silent. It was a victory, but I knew it was just one battle in a longer war. These things always are. I had won this round with creativity and a loophole. She would be back, armed with new motions and proposed amendments. It was the nature of the beast. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Mrs. Gable. Subject: Feud. Proposed Emergency Bylaw Amendment, Article 11, Section G. I opened it. A proposal has been submitted for immediate review by the board to amend Article 11. The new Section G would explicitly prohibit any temporary recreational apparatuses exceeding a height of 6 feet or involving any form of gravity-assisted launch from an elevated position. I smiled to myself and closed the email. They were learning. They were adapting. But so was I. I took a sip of my beer, my mind already turning. A 6-foot height limit, eh? That was restrictive. But the bylaw said nothing about lateral propulsion. Nothing at all about torsion or counterweights. My gaze drifted to the 2 big oak trees in my backyard. They were strong, perfectly spaced. I started to wonder just how far 100 pounds of counterweight could launch a 50-pound soapbox car. I was already drafting my counter-argument. It involved a trebuchet,